The Witcher 3 is an action role-playing game that presents the player with an immense world in which to explore. Matching the sheer size of the kingdom is the range of activities to undertake. Most of the quests are highly relevant to the overall narrative, whilst others serve more as side activities, but they all still manage to feel integral to the experience as a whole. Players assume the role of Geralt, who is tasked with tracking down his adopted daughter from the clutches of an otherworldly force known as the Wild Hunt. Throughout the journey, you will come to possess a generous amount of weapons, magical abilities and skills that can all be leveled up through the intricate skill tree system. It really allows players to experiment and ultimately craft a character that caters to their own specific style of play. From standard melee attacks, a handy dodge mechanic and spells, there is plenty to get used to and utilize within each battle. Control is tight and responsive, which further enhances the overall feel of each encounter and never sees defeat being the fault of poor design, rather just the player's lack of skill. Don't let the number in the title put you off. It's the perfect jumping on point for the series, so if you're looking for an immersive RPG to lose yourself in, The Witcher 3 will have you covered. If there is one word that could sum up Persona 5, that word would have to be style. Everything from the characters, environments to the music and menus are presented in a way that lends the experience an extremely unique feel. As with many RPGs, the player will find themselves assuming the role of a mute hero who is sent to live with a family friend after a rather unfortunate encounter lands him in trouble with the law. Once there, he starts attending the local high school, which sees him forming bonds with several other students as they team up to unravel the several mysteries that surround the area. Gameplay is mainly split into two types. You'll find yourself participating in a wide range of activities which all benefit your character's proficiency both in and outside of battle. The second being that of scouring dungeons and encountering a huge array of enemies, and it's here that the game's remarkable turn-based combat system comes into play. It all revolves around special entities known as personas, which each character possesses. By using them, it is possible to unleash devastating attacks and magical abilities that can turn the tide of a battle in the blink of an eye. If you have yet to play Persona 5, it quite simply offers up one of the finest RPG experiences on the system and is well worth a purchase. The Resident Evil 2 remake brings the classic adventure into the modern age and manages to build upon and surpass nearly every aspect of the original, resulting in one of the finest survival horror games to ever see the light of day. You take up the role of either Claire or Leon and are plunged into a zombie-ridden city and are tasked with escaping the living nightmare. Taking place from a third-person perspective as opposed to the fixed camera angles of old, Raccoon City comes to life in a way that has never been seen before and presents a truly terrifying experience. A huge array of weaponry is at your disposal in order to deal with the hordes of undead enemies, as well as several items that not only play into combat, but several puzzles that litter the environment. Juggling your limited resources and exploring the city soon becomes one of the main aspects of the game, deciding on whether to pop off a few more shots or save them for something unseen around the corner really pushes the player to weigh up the pros and cons of each situation. If you played the original, you'll find more than enough here to jump into the adventure again, but for those playing it for the first time, this is the perfect way to experience this timeless classic in the modern age. God of War takes the series in an entirely new direction that instead chooses to focus upon a far more story-driven adventure as opposed to the hack-and-slash setup of old. It introduces Kratos, now as a father, in a much more meaningful journey that sees himself and his son set out to scatter the ashes of his recently departed mother. But it's not just the narrative change that is present, as nearly every aspect of the experience has evolved, right down to the basic gameplay, which now takes place from an over-the-shoulder perspective, with the combat system adapted to the new setup as well. Kratos now wields an axe known as Leviathan, which is infused with magic and allows the player to take on enemies in many different ways, may it be through combo-based attacks, magic, or even just flat-out throwing it at them. There are many options available to the player, and with the axe also being subject to upgrades through the use of special items known as runestones, it is now easier than ever to cater the weapon to your specific style of play, which really comes into effect when taking on some of the tougher enemies throughout the journey. If you've yet to give it a go, God of War seriously deserves a playthrough. It's an experience that will stay with you long after the credits have rolled. Bloodborne offers up one of the most rewarding but at the same time frustrating and soul-destroying experiences on the PlayStation 4. Sharing many similarities with the likes of Dark Souls, the player is tasked with making their way through a dark and decaying world which is inhabited by a wide range of terrifying monsters that do nothing but try to stop you dead in your tracks. The combat requires the player to think on their toes, with the onslaught of attacks aimed towards them becoming quite relentless, but with each death it will only spur you on to get better and understand the various mechanics that are in place. You have the ability to carry several weapons at any one time, which really opens up all types of differing playstyles and strategies when encountering each enemy. If the action ever gets too much though, players can retreat to an area known as the Hunter's Dream. This area facilitates many different aspects of the game, such as leveling up your weapons and armor, buying clothing or items that all aid you out in the field. But there is a catch, as when travelling to this area, any enemies you have taken out will respawn upon your return. As mentioned, Bloodborne can be rough, but for those who are willing to stick with it, you'll find one of the best games on the system. Death Stranding is the latest adventure from the legendary Hideo Kojima. It's a highly unique experience that casts players as a man known as Sam Porter Bridges and sees them setting out to unite a broken America after a deadly cataclysm has torn the world apart. You essentially play as a sort of delivery man, which sees the player braving the now dangerous outdoors in order to deliver vital supplies to the pockets of society that remain. It's a really interesting premise, and couple this with the several obstacles that block the way forward, such as groups of enemies known as mules that will stop at nothing to acquire any items you may be transporting, or the deadly timefall rain that transforms the landscape and brings about entities known as BTs that can stop you dead in your tracks. Those expecting an action-packed journey might be turned off by the methodical nature of essentially hiking through the environment, but for those looking for something entirely unique, Death Stranding will definitely scratch that itch. Marvel's Spider-Man offers the player the chance to step into the shoes of the web-slinging hero inside what essentially is one of the finest open-world games to date. As you would expect, all of Spider-Man's abilities are at your fingertips, which helps you traverse the city freely by using webs to swing from building to building. This aspect alone lends the game a sort of freedom not found in most open-world games. To add to this, there is a pretty robust combat system in place that consists of 3 inputs, one being for physical-based attacks, another for webs, and finally one for dodging. It's a simple setup that allows for quite a bit of experimentation, thanks to the use of several environmental elements such as manhole covers and various other objects that you can use against enemies. But what really stands out is the focus mode, which utilizes a meter and allows the player to unleash devastating attacks that can take down several enemies at once in a pretty cinematic fashion that makes for some spectacular battles throughout the game. If you're a fan of Spider-Man, this one is a no-brainer. Ghost of Tsushima is a new action-adventure from the team at Sucker Punch that manages to bring Japan to life in a way that has never been done before. The player assumes the role of a samurai known as Jin, who sees his homeland invaded by a foreign enemy. Now the game features an incredibly detailed open world, which the player can explore and take on a diverse set of quests that never manage to feel obtuse or tame. Each NPC you meet feels like a natural occurrence and does nothing but draw the player in to the already intoxicating experience. As you would expect, combat plays a huge role in the proceedings. It shares much in common with the many Souls-like games on the market. It can be sadistically unforgiving if you are not prepared, but once you have mastered the several mechanics in place, such as the parrying system and varying speeds of your attacks, it all comes together and presents a tight and responsive experience. Throughout the journey, you can upgrade your character with several abilities that make this process even easier. If you're a fan of open-world adventures, or just interested in the subject matter, Ghost of Tsushima would make a perfect addition to your collection. Developed by Guerrilla Games, most commonly known for the first-person shooting franchise Killzone, comes an entirely new adventure that sees the player taking up the role of a young woman known as Aloy. Set in a post-apocalyptic world ruled by robotic creatures, Aloy sets out on a journey to unravel the many mysteries behind the strange place to ultimately find her place within it. Essentially an open-world action-adventure, the environment is an incredibly crafted space, with a diverse set of various locales such as jungles, deserts, and and snowy mountaintops to explore, but the real star of the show has to be the combat, and the way in which each robotic enemy possesses their own unique threat. It forces the player to adapt on the fly in order to overcome each situation at hand. Many weapons are afforded to the player, from bows and arrows to makeshift machine guns and traps. There are plenty of options at your disposal. Now, the main journey will last players quite some time due to its generous amount of content, as well as optional activities that help pad out the experience, but in a meaningful way. Nothing ever feels forced in. If you still haven't got round to playing this modern classic, now would be the perfect time to jump in, especially with it now being available on the PC as well. The Final Fantasy VII Remake finally landed in 2020. After a somewhat agonizing wait, it brings the classic adventure soaring into the modern era and manages to capture, if not surpass, the essence of the original journey many fans hold so close to their hearts. Now, the remake is broken up into several parts, with this release essentially covering the Midgar section of the game, which sees the player taking up the role of Cloud and a band of like-minded individuals who are set on bringing down the shady corporation known as Shinra. Much has changed in the several years since the original's release. Each environment can now be fully explored and appreciated thanks to the incredible visuals and design. The combat has been revamped as well and is now presented as a sort of hybrid system that sees real-time combat blended with the style of old, that allows the player to pause the action mid-fight and select from a whole range of magical abilities and special skills that can all be upgraded over the course of the adventure. For those that never played it back in the day, this is the perfect way to experience this timeless adventure. Well, that does it for today's video. Make sure to hit subscribe to be notified of videos in the future, and as always, thanks for watching.